Thank you all for being here. I don't remember seeing this hall that packed, and I've been here since that hall, was built. So apparently there's a lot of interest, which speaks to how valuable this visit is, and how valuable having Rashid here and Rashid himself. So first and foremost, I want to thank Professor Khalidi for being here. It's a privilege to call him a friend, a great scholar. We've been trying to get him to do this for some time. His busy schedule did not allow, but he gave us a priority and did make the time. So thank you so much, Rashid, for being here. I don't think I need to introduce Rashid, because you guys here are an attestation of how important this talk is. And this is just AUC community. This is not even open to the public. So imagine, so few scholars and academics have the kind of standing that Rashid has, both in the public eye and in academia. An accomplished scholar with books that taught us cross disciplines so many things about how to read history, about Middle East history in particular. One of the few scholars and academics who's actually engaged in the real world, engaged politically, pays a price for his standing. This is not just performative politics. This is scholarly work that is politically engaged. For me, he is a reflection of what praxis is. This is not something that we can say about many scholars or academics in particular. So I think we all know how privileged and lucky to have Rashid among. Rashid, without further ado, you want to start this off?
Thank you. Move over there to speak. Tamam. Thank you all for coming. It's a pleasure to be back in Cairo for the first time in, I think, 12 or 13 years. Thank you, Rabab, for persistently inviting me. Again and again and again. كتر خيرك يعني. You did a good job. You did a good job. It worked. I'm gonna talk about my book, The 100 Years War on Palestine, and I will finish by saying a little bit about how that book connects to our present reality in Palestine and the region. But first, I want to talk about this book. I didn't write this book for you, yani this audience. I didn't write it for an Arab audience. I didn't write it for an Egyptian audience. I didn't write it for an audience that I presume knows a little bit about Palestine, or at least hasn't been deluged with misinformation, lies, myths that the Zionists have propagated over more than a century. I wrote it mainly for a Western audience, and I wrote it out of a desire to respond to this disinformation and this distortion around the history of Palestine in the West. I tried to write a book that was relatable and approachable for an ordinary reader. It is a rigorously written book. There are 45 pages of footnotes, but you don't have to read the footnotes to get the argument. So, I hope anybody can read it, but at the same time, if you really want to understand why I'm saying what I'm saying, there's a lot of documentation of my argument, which I'm going to give you in a minute. I wrote it because my son would not leave me alone. He kept saying, "Yeah, Baba, enough boring academic writing. Yeah, Baba, enough writing for other historians. Enough of this turgid, boring prose. Write something for ordinary people. Talk about the things that we talk about at home. Talk about what Aunt Ambara said, and talk about what your grandfather said to you, and talk about what your father told you, and talk about what you yourself went through in this life of yours. And so I tried to do that. The book's actually available in Arabic at Shuruq in Maidan Talat Harb, if any of you ever go downtown. And you can buy it in Arabic. I don't know if it's available in English in Cairo. Now, I'm going to read you the title of the book because I think the whole argument of the book can be summed up in the title. The title of the book is The 100 Years' War on Palestine, A History of Settler Colonialism and Resistance. Every word in that title is meant to convey a specific message, and I had specific intentions in using this title. So I called this book A War on Palestine and not A War in Palestine. And I specified there's a dates underneath, 1917 to 2017 when the book was finished. And I specified that this war started in 1917. I'm going to explain why. Let me tell you how important it was for me to include the words, the 100 Years' War on Palestine. I got an email last night from the translator of my book into French, who said that under pressure from the Zionist lobby in France, the publisher tried to change the title to the 100 Years' War in Palestine, en Palestine, instead of contre la Palestine. So the title was meant to be an offensive weapon. And it was taken as such by the Zionist lobby in France, who did everything they could to change the title in French. The book still hasn't come out. It's been delayed for 4 months because of my publisher's cowardice, my French publisher's cowardice. That's another story. So let me talk about why I called the book The 100 Years' War on Palestine, A History of Settler Colonialism and Resistance. I wanted to establish clearly and emphatically that this is a series of events that started with the advent of British colonialism in Palestine. Zionism started before that. Palestinian identity developed before that. But that's not where this conflict starts. It starts in entirely the form it has taken ever since then, without changing in its fundamentals, when Britain issued the Balfour Declaration, 22 November 1917, and British troops occupied Jerusalem on December 8, 1917. That's when the conflict begins in the form it has had ever since. Not with Herzl, not with the first settlements in the 1880s, not with the development of Palestinian national consciousness, with the eruption of Western imperialism into the Middle East and into Palestine specifically. This is extremely important because this has never changed. This is part of a dynamic which continues to this day, and I'm going to come back to that when I talk about the war of annihilation that Israel has waged in Gaza for the last 2 years. I wanted to make sure that every reader understood that this is not a conflict that has been going on since time immemorial. The President of the United States has repeated this idiotic fallacy, saying they've been fighting each other. I can't imitate Trump. They've been fighting each other for centuries and millennia. No. There never was any conflict between Arabs and Jews in Palestine in the entire history of Palestine since the Islamic conflict. Never, ever conflict between Crusaders and the Ayyubids, yes. But between Jews and Arabs, between Muslims and Jews, never in the history of Palestine was there any such thing until the advent of Zionism, until the arrival of the British. So I think that's a really, at least in terms of an American audience, in terms of a Western audience, in terms of people who believe the nonsense that they've been churning out for decades and decades, it's very important to explain that, I think. I also wanted to show that this is not just a conflict between Zionism and Israel on one side and the Palestinians on the other. It always involved the massive intervention, and it still involves the massive intervention of great powers, invariably on the side of the Zionist movement and, since 1948, on the side of Israel. These powers are not innocent bystanders. They were never neutral. They were never honest brokers. I have a book, Dishonest Brokers, which goes in detail into exactly how deceitful the United States was in the entire so-called peace process over Palestine. And they were never disinterested actors. They had their interests. They were always on one side. They were and they are full parties, these various foreign powers, the British at one stage, others at other stages, but most recently, obviously, the United States. They were and are full parties to this war on Palestine, and we see that today in Gaza. Finally, I wanted to underline the enormous imbalance between the two sides in Palestine. We're probably aware of it in this part of the world. We know Israel is enormously powerful, the Palestinians are relatively weak. But in the United States, Israel is David, and the Arabs are Goliath. Hamas is Goliath. And Israel is tiny little Israel, threatened by millions of Muslims. This nonsense is believed by enormous numbers of people in the United States. I wanted to underline this imbalance, and I wanted to shatter the false impression that there is some form of equivalence between colonizer and colonized, between oppressor and oppressed. Now, that's the explanation in part for the dating. 1917 is the beginning, and for calling this a war on Palestine. I used settler colonialism and resistance in the subtitle because it was essential to reframe events in Palestine for me in terms of a Western audience. It was essential to reframe events in Palestine in terms of this reality, which is a reality of settler colonialism and resistance. That's all that's going on. There's nothing else. There's not insane Islamic violence against innocent Jews. There's settler colonialism, theft of land, replacement of one people with another, and there's resistance to this process. Nothing else. There's not terrorism. There's not anything else. Those are the only terms in which this can be understood. It actually can't be understood in any other terms. Any other terms, and you misunderstand what's going on. Some of the fictions that are current in the West include that, oh, well, this is a struggle between two peoples. Yeah, well, to some extent, but that's not the basic issue. This is not Germany and France. This is a settler colonial reality. This is not a normal national movement. Yes, Zionism is a national movement, but it's a colonizing national movement. And it's very important to argue that. There are various other myths that I try and dispel by the use of these terms. Now, Zionism has many aspects. I feature the settler colonial aspect, A, because it's the most salient and prominent, and B, because it's the only way to understand what has been going on for over 100 years. But there are other elements. Zionism is a national project, a project to create a Jewish state. I mean, that's what Herzl wrote about, Der Judenstaat, the Jewish state, or the state of the Jews. That was always an aspect of it. It was also a project which aimed to provide a refuge for persecuted Jews in Europe. That's an aspect of it. There's no question. And there's a religious aspect. There's a connection between Judaism and Palestine, obviously. Anybody who reads the Quran knows that. Surah Al-Isra, read it. Read it carefully. It describes the destruction of the temples. Where? In Palestine. Read the Quran, read the Bible. And if you are a believer, you believe that there's a connection. Doesn't mean that you believe every myth about the connection, but you believe that there's a connection between Judaism and Palestine. And if you're not a believer, look at the archaeology, and you can see that there's a connection. But I want to make it clear that in spite of these factors, the national factor, the religious factor, the persecution factor, the essential dynamic in Palestine is and has always been of a colonial settler movement based in and supported by Europe and the United States. The base of the Zionist project was always New York, London, Paris, Berlin. Always was, still is. That project exists out of a metropole which started back in the beginning of Zionism and continues to be the metropole to this day. And the intention of the movement was to take over a country and displace its indigenous population. They said it. They didn't pretend they were doing they pretended they were doing something else, but if you read carefully what they said, the earliest Zionist leaders, Herzl, Weizmann, even Ben-Gurion, they said that's what they were trying to do. And it is clear to anybody, including anybody who knows anything about Egyptian history, that every colonial conquest, whether it's standard colonialism, such as you had here with Lord Cromer and the British, or settler colonialism, as in Algeria or Palestine, has always invariably engendered resistance of the colonized. You had a revolution in this country in 1919 because the British were intolerable. The Indians had revolutions. Everybody, under standard administrative colonialism, rebelled against their colonial rulers. And the rebellions in settler colonial countries, like North America, and like Algeria, and like South Africa, and like Palestine, were even more fierce. Because it wasn't just bringing in Lord Cromer to tell you what to do. It was bringing in English settlers in North America to kill the native population and replace them. So settler colonialism is infinitely more toxic and infinitely more poisonous than standard administrative colonialism such as Egypt or Iraq or India suffered from. And that resistance has always been coded by the colonizer with derogatory terms. The British, for example, in Ireland, didn't call the Irish who rebelled against them patriots or freedom fighters or nationalists. They called them bandits. They called them barbaric. They called them criminals. The term of art today is terrorists. So if you oppose a foreign occupation in Iraq or in Palestine, you're a terrorist. The number of people killed by the people fighting the terrorism is always infinitely greater. But when you kill them with bombs, somehow it's not terrorism. If you kill enormous numbers of civilians, that's not terrorism. But if you use a different weapon in a different fashion and you are of a different positionality, you're a terrorist. But that's the way colonizers have always labeled their opposition. And so I stress in the subtitle that the Palestinians have always resisted this. That's what it is. It's resistance. And it's inevitable. And it happens everywhere. And it always continues until either the subject population is eliminated, as in many parts of North America and Australia, or the subject population succeeds, as in South Africa, and it appears to, hopefully, in Ireland as well. First overseas European settler colony, Ireland. They've been after us for 100 years, the Zionists. Ireland went through 800 years. The English started in 1172, and there are still British troops in Northern Ireland. Talk about that later if you want. Now, how do I illustrate this reality of settler colonialism and resistance? I do so by using Zionist sources. The book is full of quotations in particular by someone called Zev Jabotinsky. If you don't know who Zev Jabotinsky is, I will tell you. Zev Jabotinsky is the founder of a strand of Zionism called the revisionist trend in Zionism. He was a Russian, emigrated to Palestine, has changed his name to Zev. He was Vladimir originally. He wrote in Russian originally, and his most important writings are actually in Russian. Now translated into English, Hebrew, and everything else. He is the person who founded a trend which is known by the political party name today of Likud. The Likud party has dominated every Israeli government since 1977, with a few exceptions. Begin, Shamir, Netanyahu himself, Sharon, Ehud Olmert. All of these people are leaders of the Likud party. The Likud party dominates the current coalition in Israel. So he is the spiritual father of the tendency that has dominated Israeli politics for nearly half a century. An important figure, in other words, not some marginal character who has no importance. And he was a very honest man, to his credit. He wrote in 1923 in an article in Russian called The Iron Wall. He wrote the following. I'm going to read you a quote from Zev Jabotinsky. He said, "Every native population in the world resists colonists as long as it has the slightest hope of being able to rid itself of the danger of being colonized. That is what the Arabs in Palestine are doing." 1923. And what they will persist in doing as long as there remains a solitary spark of hope that they will be able to prevent the transformation of Palestine, in scare quotes, into the land of Israel, in scare quotes. I think this lays out the whole history of the conflict. They're trying to colonize. Every population resists. They're going to continue resisting until they have no more hope, because what we're trying to do is to transform the entirety of Palestine into the land of Israel. So it's an honest statement of the Zionist project's aims, and it's an honest statement of what has been happening certainly ever since the beginning of Zionism. And I think it's really important to note his use of terms like colonists, and to note that he admitted, frankly, that the idea behind Zionism was not to share Palestine or to live in Palestine peacefully with the indigenous population, but to transform it. He uses the term transformation in its entirety into Israel. Now, this is not just Jabotinsky. Herzl's book that launched, it's a booklet, it's a short book, that launched political Zionism, published in 1897, titled Der Judenstaat, the Jewish State, was very clear in its title. It didn't say a state to be shared with a bunch of other people. It said state of the Jews. It very explicitly indicated, and you read his other writings, he said this: we're going to spirit the native population across the borders. We don't want them here. We can't have them here. We can't have a Jewish state. This was an entirely Arab country when Herzl was writing. The Jewish population may have been 3 or 4 or 5%. Most of them were indigenous native Palestinian Jews, Arabic-speaking Jews at that time. He intended to do something different. He intended to bring the persecuted Jewish populations of Eastern Europe and settle them in the place of the Palestinians. And he says this in his books. He doesn't make any bones about it. And I think that all of these things are continued right up to the present. In 2018, the Israeli Knesset passed a law called Israel Nation State of the Jewish People, which basically said only Jews have the right of national self-determination. So that intention expressed by Jabotinsky and expressed by Herzl 100 or more years ago was expressed by the Israeli Knesset only a few years ago, in 2018, 7 years ago. The government that is currently in power in Israel had as its platform a statement which stressed the exclusive national rights of the Jewish people in the land of Israel. So there's a continuity from the beginning until now in all of this. Herzl was very clear on where he saw the Zionist project. He didn't see the Zionist project as a return to the status quo ante of a Jewish population that was part of the existing population. Quite the contrary. He saw it as a foreign intrusion of people whom he claimed had rights to do this into a barbaric indigenous land. And he said in one of his writings, Herzl, that the state that they intended to create would be, and I'm quoting Herzl, a wall of defense for Europe in Asia, an outpost of civilization against barbarism. Nothing has changed. Rabin said something along the lines of, we are a villa in the jungle, barbarism, civilization, Europe, villa. Nothing has changed. Nothing has changed in the rhetoric or in the self-perception of the people who are involved in this project. I'm not going to inflict much more of this on you. I'm just going to quote Jabotinsky once more because I love Jabotinsky. He's my favorite guy. In this same article, The Iron Wall, he says, and it's perceptive to an extraordinary degree. He says, Zionist colonization can proceed and develop only under the protection of a power that is independent of the native population. Think about the role of Britain. Think about the role of the United States and the Soviet Union in passing the partition resolution in 1947. Think about the role of Britain and France during the tripartite aggression on Egypt. Think about the role of the United States in 1967 or in 1982. Think about the role of the United States today in the wars on Gaza since 2008 and until this genocide of the last 2 years. He goes on. Behind it, Zionist colonization can proceed and develop only under the protection of a power that is independent of the native population, behind an iron wall which the native population cannot breach. If you wish to colonize a land in which people are already living, you must find a garrison for the land or find a benefactor who will provide a garrison on your behalf. Zionism is a colonizing venture. This is not some anti-Semitic Arab lunatic calling Zionism colonial. This is Zev Jabotinsky, the founder of the Likud party, speaking. And therefore it stands or falls on the question of armed forces. Okay, enough about the book. I structured the book to reflect the argument that I've just laid out, and in particular to stress what I said about the role of external actors as participants in this war on Palestine. I talk about the British, the role of the British from the Balfour Declaration, 1917, their occupation of Palestine, their installation of a mandate that was intended to promote the Zionist project, and their suppression of the Great Revolt of 1936-39. Crucial role. Israel was created in large measure by the British. I mean, there was a self-creation myth. We did it all ourselves, they always say. But actually, without the British, they would have been nowhere. The British created the legal framework, helped them create the embryonic government, and most importantly, created their armed forces. The British trained 40,000 Jewish policemen, settlement police, numerary, supernumerary police. They had different titles for them. Armed them, trained them, organized them, and unleashed them on the Palestinian population from 1936 to 39. They incorporated members of the Haganah and the Palmach, two of the major militias, into the British armed forces in joint units with British troops to carry out exactly what Israel has done ever since, blowing up homes over the heads of their inhabitants, shooting prisoners, shooting innocent people. I could go on and on and on. The British trained them to do this. And then in World War II, the British took 5,000 of the best trained of these guys, put them in a Jewish brigade of the British Army, and trained them even further in modern conventional warfare. The Jewish brigade produced 32 generals of the Israeli army. Moshe Dayan was trained by the British. Yigal Allon was trained by the Yitzhak Ben Sada, who was the first head of the Palmach, was trained. I could go on and on. There are dozens of them. The British gave them, produced for them, the military with which they conquered Palestine in 1948. So that's the first chapter of the book. Second chapter talks about the American and Soviet role in the partition plan of 1947. I won't talk about that now. The third chapter talks about the American role in the June War of 1967. The Americans gave Israel a green light for their attack on Egypt and Syria. This was not an Israeli idea. This was an idea that was run by President Johnson himself, Secretary of Defense McNamara himself, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs himself, in a meeting in Washington before the June War. And the United States then pushed through UN Security Council Resolution 242. I talk about that in the book. I won't bore you with that right now. I talk in the fourth chapter, I talk about the 1982 war, which was an American-Israeli war. Sharon goes to Washington, gets a green light for the war, tells Secretary of State Haig, I'm going to do this, 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 and this. Haig says, fantastic. Just get a good provocation and you're good. Green light. The notes of Haig's assistant said green light from the United States to the Israeli war on Lebanon in 1982. And the last chapter is about, the second to last chapter is about the Oslo process, which I can talk about if you wish. And the final chapter is about Gaza. Now, the point that I try and make is that none of these chapters in the history of Zionism and in this struggle over Palestine involved the Zionist movement and Israel all alone. Every one of these chapters, every one of these episodes was driven by the decisions of external actors. Would not, could not have happened without the decisions, and in many cases, the direct involvement of external actors, whether Britain, France, whether the Soviet Union, or mainly the United States. And this is as true of the 2 years of genocide that we have just been witnessing against Gaza as it was of every earlier episode of this war on Palestine for more than a century now. The United States delivered to Israel since October 2023 $22 billion worth of arms, and there are 6 billion more on the way. Every single Israeli combat aircraft, F-16, F-15, F-35, is American. Every Israeli attack helicopter is American. And then there's the role of the British and the role of the Germans and the role of the other Western European parts of the metropole for this project. Every Israeli Merkava tank, every Namir armored personnel carrier has a German engine. The Israeli armored corps does not move without German engines. The Israeli Air Force does not fly without American aircraft and helicopters. This is a reality. This is the metropole for this project. This is and has always been the metropole for this project. You have had 6 meetings of the UN Security Council since the war began in October of 2023 to attempt to impose a ceasefire. The United States vetoed 6 attempts to bring about a ceasefire. The United States 6 times prevented a halt to the slaughter. Now, if that's not direct involvement of a superpower, I don't know what is. Using a superpower veto to prevent a halt to the slaughter. Finally, without these things, without a pipeline of U.S. private funding for Israeli settlements in the occupied territories and for a huge number of other projects inside Israel, this war would not have been waged, could not have been waged. In fact, the whole project could not have the kind of achievements and success that it's had. This has been, since October, a U.S.-Israeli war on Gaza. It's not an Israeli war. It's a U.S.-Israeli war, or if you want, an Israeli-U.S. war on Gaza, with shared aims, including the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. Now you may say, well, that's what the Israelis wanted. Is that what the Americans wanted? Yes. Go to the White House website. Look at the Office of Management and Budget request for funds in fiscal year 2026, and you will see 3 separate appropriations that the U.S. government under President Biden asked for from Congress for aiding Palestinians outside of Gaza, Palestinians who were intended to be removed from Gaza by the Israeli offensive. At the end of October of 2023, the United States and Israel intended the ethnic cleansing of Gaza. Now, that didn't happen because of the Egyptian and Jordanian position supported by the Saudis at the time, which actually was reported. This is not even a secret. And the OMB thing, it's public. Go on the White House website, Office of Management and Budget, end of October 2023, and you can see it. It's paragraph about 80 in a long budgetary request. So that's what they intended to do. They were not able to do it, but that was what they intended. So when I say shared aims, there are many shared aims, regional aims, having to do with Iran, having to do with Hezbollah, having to do with Hamas, but this was one of the main aims, ethnic cleansing. I'm going to end now by, I hope, lifting your spirits a little bit. I hope I have depressed you sufficiently that I can end with something that's not quite so grim as what I've been talking about so far. And this is the cause for optimism. U.S. public support for Israel has collapsed. The United States has never, in the history of polling, had public opinion that was anything but overwhelmingly supportive of Israel. I mean, wall-to-wall support, both political parties, young people and old people, east, west, north, south, rich, poor, everybody who was polled was more or less supportive of Israel. Throughout the history of polling, and it probably goes back to Wilson, in fact, Woodrow Wilson, Zionism was popular in the United States. Even when it wasn't popular in the Jewish community, it was popular among Christian evangelicals. At the time of Woodrow Wilson, and in Britain as well, a lot of the support for the idea came from people who believed this was important in terms of a Christian eschatology. And that was the case in the United States. And you had the efforts of Zionism, decades of really brilliantly fashioned propaganda. So there was wall-to-wall support. This has collapsed. There's not one poll that shows that Israel has massive support in the United States. In fact, more people oppose Israel today than support it in almost every demographic. Among young people, overwhelmingly. Among people who vote Democratic, overwhelmingly. Even among Republicans, support for Israel has shrunk. And among young Republicans, it's shrunk even more. This is unprecedented. This has never happened in the history of the United States since the beginning of the 20th century, since the beginning of Zionism. This is enormously important. Obviously, public opinion by itself doesn't do anything. That has to deliver political change, and that has yet to come. But I think this is a really, really important thing. What people saw being done to Gaza cannot be unseen. And for the first time, because of social media, independent media, most Americans, especially young Americans, were not dependent on the lying mainstream corporate media. They did not watch and they did not believe CNN, New York Times, Washington Post, MSNBC, Fox, that enormous system of Zionist propaganda, which is the American mainstream corporate media. Most people don't, when I talk in class about anything to do with the mainstream media, nobody in class knows what I'm talking about. I mentioned an article in the New York Times, blank faces. a friend of mine was talking to his 14-year-old daughter and said to her, I saw such and such on CNN. And the girl turns to him and says, Baba, what is a CNN? What is a CNN? She didn't even know it existed. I mentioned Baron de Ruyter, who had a concession in Qajar, Iran in the 19th century. If you're interested in Iranian history, I can tell you more. The British forced the Qajar government to give enormous concessions to this British millionaire. And I said, Reuters, like the Reuters news agency. And I was in a classroom with as many people as this. I swear, not one person knew what I was talking about. Not one of them had ever heard about Reuters. And that's a good thing. That's a good thing. What is a CNN? That's a good thing. Those, of course, there is a generation over 50 or over 60 who sit there and watch the propaganda channels and are still brainwashed. But increasing numbers of people don't believe that stuff. And the proof of it is the polls. I mean, they have come to see the reality. And especially, they've come to see what brave young Palestinian kids, young people, with their phones have been showing them and have been killed. About 240 of them have been murdered by Israel, one by one, because they know who's doing what. They have drones everywhere. They have every single phone in their database. And every time somebody is broadcasting a photograph of an atrocity, they zero in on them and they try and kill them. 240 people have been killed, mainly journalists, but also just young people who have come to be known for their social media profile as documenting the horrors that Israel is perpetrating. In spite of that, they've continued. And that is something that once it's been seen cannot be unseen. And so it may or may not be that this change in public opinion will lead to a rapid political change. It probably won't be rapid if it happens, inshallah, if it happens. But that change in opinion is bolstered by something that's visceral. When you've seen these atrocities, it's very hard to forget them. It's hard for me to watch them, but everybody has been, especially young people, have been watching them. So I think that all of this has begun to demolish the structure of lies and fairy tales that compose the previously dominant Zionist narrative. So I wrote this book in order to help demolish that narrative. But frankly, young people in Gaza, with their live streaming of what Israel is doing, have done more than any number of books could possibly have done. The book has sold very well. It's reached all kinds of people. There's a flood of other literature by Palestinian poets, by essayists, by writers, which are being published for the first time in the United States. And all of that together is important. But I think what has come out of Gaza, what people have seen with their very own eyes, is the most important thing in changing things. I think that much remains to be done, but this is all at huge cost, at the cost of an enormous sacrifice in life on the part of the people of Gaza. This is a promising beginning. Thank you very much. حاجة عندي حاجة هنا.
Thank you so much, Rashid. I'm not going to do what moderators usually do, which I never understood, which is a recap of what the speaker says. It's just like, it's so boring. So I'm not going to do that. But more importantly, I'm going to selflessly give up my chance to ask Rashid questions so that our students get more time. So let me tell you the plan. Students get the first chance to ask questions. So until 2, I'm going to prioritize our students. After 2, because this is when our assembly hour ends. At 2, we're going to pause for 2 minutes. Whoever needs to leave for class, they can do that. After which, I'm going to take a few more questions. And finally is our PSSA and Student Union, Omar and... Omar, are you here? Okay, you guys. And then we have a bit of a surprise that the students prepared for Professor Khalidi. So we're going to do that towards the end. We're going to take 5 questions at a time so that we can actually get as many questions as we can. So please, one more thing. Hassan and Layla, where are you guys? I can't see you. They have the mics.
You know.
Oh, so this is Layla, very nicely dressed. And where is Hassan? I need one. Okay, perfect. Also very smart. So just raise your hand. Once you get the mic, state your name and your discipline so we can show off who we are. Be very concise, please, so that we can take as many questions as we can. I can't ask them to do this because it's physically impossible. There's nowhere for them to go. If you find chairs, please try to make way so that Hassan and Layla can go. But if you can, then okay. So we're gonna start here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm gonna remember you. Okay, so we have our first 5. Go ahead.
All right. My name is William Goodman, Middle Eastern Studies major and History double major. And I was wondering, in your book, you characterized the Nakba continuously as ethnic cleansing. But when we look at like the intent behind the Nakba and how the Irgun, the Lehi, the Haganah, and just kind of revisionism had taken over the Israeli project, we see intent for genocide. And so I was wondering, what made you choose to characterize that as an ethnic cleansing instead of a genocide?
Mm-hmm.
Hello, my name is Naya, and I'm a Palestinian student studying political science here at AUC. My question to you is, you mentioned quite a bit the change in public opinion in the US, and I wanted to know how will the change in public opinion affect the influence of organizations like AIPAC in US politics?
Mm-hmm. Come on.
Hi, my name is Shah. I'm a double major student studying political science and business marketing. And my question to you was actually about the fact that Western states have recently been recognizing Palestine as a state. And I wanted to know how you explain that because it caught me off guard.
Yeah.
So my name is Muhannad. I'm a mechanical.
Hey, Muhannad, I don't see you. Okay.
I'm a mechanical engineer student, and my question is: if we think about the British occupation as like they have the UK and they expand, so if we think about the Israeli occupation, so when they shrink, where they would go?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Good afternoon. My name is Ali Kohil. I'm a freshman here at AUC. And my question is, I guess, as a majority of young people here in Egypt, we see the videos and the pictures coming out of Gaza, and we feel so hopeless. We feel like there's nothing we can do. So other than, I guess, keeping updated with the news, what else can we do to contribute to the Palestinian cause? Thank you.
Okay. Let me answer these questions. Let me start with the last question. What can you do? And I always thought that as a professor and as an adult, it's not my job to tell young people what to do. I mean, I advise them about the world as best I can as a historian and as a teacher. When I was a rebellious young student, and we were fighting the Vietnam War, and we were supporting the Black Panthers, and we were demonstrating, and we were being tear gassed, many times our elders would come to us and wisely advise us that this is the correct way to do things, and that's the correct way to do things, and you shouldn't do this, and you shouldn't do that. And we ignored them completely. And we did what we did. And ultimately, the anti-war movement won. Now, maybe in spite of the errors of the young people, and maybe because we had the zeitgeist and people sooner or later realized the Vietnam War was an atrocity. And so I don't have advice about what you can do. I can tell you that you must understand what's going on, meaning keep yourselves informed and learn the history. And try and spread those things as best you can. This is a society which is, in principle open to knowing about Palestine and knows a good bit about Palestine, much more than many other societies. But this is not a situation in which any Arab government, without exception, well, with one exception, has done anything up to the level of what was required. The only exception I will allow for is Yemen. Okay? And that's true. I was asked the same question in Turkey. What can we do? Our government hasn't done enough. And I said, nobody has done enough. This war should have been stopped in the first month, the second month. These atrocities should have been halted. This ethnic cleansing, this genocide, should have been stopped long ago. And that could have been done if more governments did more at the very beginning, even against the intentions of the United States of America. It was possible. And it's still possible. I understand we now live in a increasingly authoritarian society in the United States, in a one-party system, where all of the levers of government are in the hands of one party, in which dissent is being suppressed, in which the legal profession is being attacked, in which the media is being... I'm talking about the United States. You might find some similarities here to situations with which you are familiar. And when I said these things in Turkey, they found similarities to what they're... But there are means, even in those kinds of society, even in the United States, even in Turkey, even here, even in Arab countries where democracy is absent or is very limited, there are things that are possible. Push those limits. That's all I can say. From my experience in both the United States and living in the Middle East. The parts public... This has just died. Public opinion can have an impact. And you have to push. You have to work. I mean, it's not easy. And I have no specific advice.
I'm going to interject here and let you know that in coordination with the Political Science Association, we're going to organize a teach-in with activists and whatnot about how do students' movements evolve, what could be done safely and effectively in authoritarian contexts and elsewhere, so you can actually have a roster to build on.
Americans about how to operate in an authoritarian context. Muhannad, British occupation. What will happen with the Israeli occupation if they are forced to withdraw? Where would they go? Well, first of all, there are different situations. The British were external occupiers who were encouraging a settler colonial movement, but the settlers were not English. And so the British Army left in 1948 when they'd achieved their objectives or when they realized they couldn't achieve their objectives. It's fundamentally different in a settler colonial situation. And there are various possible endings for a settler colonial situation. One is the utter elimination of the indigenous population, or the virtual elimination. North America, Australia, New Zealand. The settlers basically destroyed the indigenous society. That's one possibility. Another possibility is the expulsion of the settlers. That's what happened in Algeria. The entire settler population left. And then there's a third set of possibilities, which you can see in South Africa, or Kenya, or Zimbabwe, or most importantly, Ireland, where it's now recognized that people who started out as settlers are now part of Ireland. Yani, whether we like it or not, the Irish are now saying, this is not a situation where we're going to kick them out and send them back to Scotland and Wales and England. They've been here for hundreds and hundreds of years. And so the Palestinian situation falls somewhere I would argue somewhere most likely in the middle. I don't think they'll ever be able to destroy the Palestinian population. They've failed consistently over 100 years. There's still more Palestinians inside Palestine than there are Jewish Israelis. Even today, after wave after wave after wave of ethnic cleansing, after genocide, there are still more Palestinians than Israeli Jews. So my guess is that somewhere in the middle is going to have to be the solution. I don't think they can be kicked out, myself. I think it's physically impossible. I don't think in fact, there are all kinds of moral issues involved. But I think that you're most likely to find something in the middle. How, when, Allahu alam, I don't know. I mean, I'm a historian. I don't predict the future. The person in a cafe about recognizing Palestine. Why did these countries do this? Because of enormous pressure from below. You had 500,000 people crossing a bridge in Melbourne. Melbourne's not that big a city. I mean, a very large proportion of the entire population of Melbourne was demonstrating in favor of Palestine. In countries which are virulently anti-Palestinian, virulently pro-Israeli, like Germany and France, you have huge demonstrations. My daughter says in Nice, a city that's ruled by a pro-Zionist mayor who had Israeli flags all over the Baladiyya, all over the municipal head, they have big demonstrations every single week, every Saturday. And this is true in Germany. This is true all over the West. You've seen what happened in the United States on almost every campus. They were forced to do this. Now, let me say one more thing. Recognizing Palestine or talking about a two-state solution without talking about how you get there, how you end the occupation and when, and how you end settlement, the colonization process, and when, is meaningless. It was a meaningless gesture. It was an attempt to appease public opinion by saying the easiest thing, recognize Palestine, two-state solution, without talking about ending occupation, ending Israel's security control, removing this metastasizing, colonizing project from the occupied territories. It's meaningless. You're not talking about a Palestinian state. You're talking about a Bantustan under Israeli control. And that's what most of them really mean, by the way. But that's another issue. Public opinion in APAC. The shift in public opinion, I think, is here to stay. I don't think that people are going to go back and say, poor little Israel. What they've seen over 2 years is proof. I mean, they've seen 2,000-pound bombs destroy hundreds of people. They've seen them. They've seen this. They've seen the hunger. They've seen the cruelty. I don't think public opinion will change. But will it change policy? Well, only if there's political action. Only if public opinion is turned into political weight. And that has yet to happen, obviously. You've had signs of it happening. You had a majority of Democratic senators voting against arms for Israel. Never happened in the history of the United States. That a majority of the Democratic Party's senators voted against arms for Israel. But that's just the beginning of a political change. And we're very, very far from public opinion being able to force policy change. It took over 10 years during the Vietnam War. It took over 10 years. Public opinion turned against the Iraq War within a year of Bush invading Iraq. It took 10 years to get the American troops out of Iraq, and even longer to get them out of Vietnam. So change in public opinion by and of itself does nothing. It has to be translated into political change. And what you're seeing now in the United States is a wave of repression, the likes of which you haven't seen in American politics since the McCarthy era of the early 1950s. The hysterical nature of the Zionist response to this change in public opinion they're unhinged. The things they are doing are abominations. They're trampling over freedom of speech. They're trampling over constitutional rights. They're trampling over academic freedom. They're doing things that are ultimately going to be harmful to them, but they're having a terrible effect on students, on academics, on the media. They're scaring people to death. And this is not just happening in the United States. It's happening in Britain, this law against Palestine action. It's happening in France. A colloque at the Collège de France, the most prestigious academic institution in the entirety of the French educational establishment, had a colloque on Palestine banned last week. And the minister made a typically self-righteous, arrogant statement about this is the right thing to do. Now, they held the colloque, they're holding the colloque, but not in the Collège de France. And this is a result of enormous pressure. I mentioned what's happening with the French translation of my book, and this is happening across the board in France and in Britain and in Germany. So there is a counteroffensive going on in response to the shift in public opinion, and that's going to be a real fight to overcome that. Last question, ethnic cleansing instead of genocide. Yes, you take your pick. Ethnic cleansing, genocide, war crimes. I'm not a lawyer. These are legal terms. I think that for me, the easiest and clearest thing to talk about in terms of what's happened in Gaza or what they were trying to do in Gaza and did to a large extent in Gaza. And what they did in 1967 and did in 1948 is ethnic cleansing, which is a war crime and which might be judged genocidal. But the destruction in Gaza was a destruction of all the means of life on a level which in some ways was even worse than the Nakba of 1948. Not as bad in some ways, but worse in other ways. So take your pick. I have no problem with any of those terms.
It's 2, so if you have a class and you need to leave, please do so quietly and quickly. Those of you who want to ask questions, please raise your hands. Sure. Sure. Let's just give us like 1 minute. People are gonna go out and then.
And tell them, the ones who are sitting on the aisles, that they can take the empty chairs.
Once there are empty seats, please take a seat. This way it's smoother. We can walk around. Okay, just wait. Sure. Okay. Sit, move. If you need to move around now. Oh, wow. Okay.
Now just give them time.
Yeah. Okay. Good.
I-
The people standing up there, please take a seat so that I can see the hands and we can move on with this. Okay. No, don't keep it. I will. Okay, we're still giving priority to AUC students. I'm sorry. So if you're not an AUC student, wait a bit. I'm going to see the students first. So, okay, let's take from this side, we're taking the young lady and Hassan. Okay, we're going to take the young lady, Hassan, and you up there because, yeah, you've been up there. And then from here, we're taking you and the person up there. Okay? You remember that? Hassan, you already took one. What's with you people? The whole talk about Zionism is giving you ideas, taking all the mics in the world. Please. Yeah.
Hello, thank you for being here. It's an honor to have you. I'm Rana Drebi, and I'm a literature major.
What's your name?
Rana?
Rana.
Yes. You didn't talk about this in your lecture, but I thought because of that we're in Egypt, I think this is an important matter to talk about. And it's that many argue that Palestinians had many chances to form a qualified leadership, but failed to act accordingly. What I'm interested in is whether those chances were ever real under the British mandate, given that the British often dismantled and dissolved political movements and instead imposed religious leadership and institutions to dissolve nationalism amongst Palestinians.
Right.
Hello, my name is Hassan and I'm in political science. And I just wanted to ask really quickly regarding your statement on social media as a reliable primary source for documenting the war. AI has been developing recently, especially deepfakes, and they've developed exponentially over the past few years. So I was just wondering, where do you still see social media as a reliable primary source for documenting the war, like 10 years down the line? And if not, what can people use to refer to reliable and unbiased news in the future?
Good question.
Cute. Thank you. Oh, shit, sorry. My name is Yusuf Hisham. I'm studying public policy. My question is, as scholars and researchers, what kind of principles should guide us when engaging and approaching dialogue with the Zionist and American academics, speakers, diplomats, especially within our context? Should we boycott? Should we confront? What should guide us in the upcoming period? Thank you.
حسب. No. You're the gender. Okay.
You've been very fair. You've been very fair. Buddy.
Thank you. My name is Sofia. I'm from Brazil, and this is relevant because it's relevant to my question. So when people are talking about this supportive Palestine, they sometimes focus in Europe and the US and not in the global South countries. And I wanted to know, and how effective do you think the support or lack of support is? In the past, the global South countries, they created many movements to be more aligned, and this is maybe changing right now or not. So I wanted to hear you speak about this.
Good question.
This Mustafa, graduate here. I'm here. A petroleum engineer. I study petroleum engineering. My question, thanks for your talk. By the end of your talk, you mentioned that there is a hope that we forget about the media, big media, named CNN, blah, blah, blah. But how we make sure in the future that the social media is not controlled by Zionists? Because, yes, it's related to his question, but my point is Netanyahu met social media influencers in US and make some spending a lot to the promotion of their reels and etc. So what makes us sure that it would remain free, not controlled by Zionists?
Good questions. I'll answer both of those questions together. You have to be a discerning media user, whatever media you use. You have to be a discriminating user, whatever media you use. I said something nasty about Reuters. I have a Reuters app on my phone. I use Reuters. I use AP. I have a New York Times and a Washington Post app on my phone. I have a Jazeera app. I have a Haaretz app. I look at all of that stuff. Do I believe everything they say? No. You have to be discerning, discriminating. You have to really think carefully before you accept the credibility of something, or learn how to take what's really the case from what they're saying is the case. And that requires experience. And it's true in every Egyptian media. You have a state that dominates the media. You can figure out what's really going on sometimes by reading state media. That you have no alternative to some extent in many countries. All the American media reflects the position of the U.S. government. Now, it's not government controlled, but the New York Times is like a mouthpiece for whatever government is in power. They're sometimes critical of the president or critical of this or that, but basically in terms of foreign policy, whatever the government says, but you can read through that. That's not just true of mainstream corporate media. That's true of social media as well. There's garbage in social media. Of course there is. The Zionists, everybody else is out there. Crazy right-wing people, crazy people on every end of the spectrum are out there. And you have to be discerning. There are independent media, at least in the United States, Drop Site News, The Intercept, and so on and so forth, which you might come to consider over time reliable. And there are similar sites in the Middle East. But you look at them very carefully. What is there by? Something coming out of Qatar. What's the foreign policy of Qatar? You think about that for 2 minutes, and you have to understand whatever Jazeera says is through that lens. And if you do that, you can use a Jazeera. And if you don't understand that, you're sometimes fooled. Now, the Zionists, they will do everything possible to make up for this disastrous, catastrophic defeat that they have suffered in the past 2 years. Netanyahu didn't just meet with influencers. The Israeli government is putting hundreds of millions of dollars into AI and into other means of creating social media content. You have to watch out for that, obviously. I think they have nothing to sell, myself. I would not want to be in their position with all the hundreds of millions of dollars because they have nothing to sell. How do you sell having killed 19,000 school children and university students in Gaza. How do you sell that? If that fact is known, people don't know it. That's what the Gaza Health Ministry said. 19,000 something students have been killed in Gaza since the war began. How can you possibly justify that? They have an impossible task. That doesn't mean that they're not going to try, and that doesn't mean that they're not going to succeed to some extent. Just now, CBS News was purchased by somebody called David Ellison. His father, Larry Ellison, is the founder of Oracle. It's a $3 billion company. Oracle proclaims itself as an Israel-friendly company. And the website says, if that's a problem for you, you shouldn't work here. So that's the father. This Nepo baby, this disgusting creature, David, has been given a few $1 billion by his baba and bought CBS News. And he installed someone we at Columbia know well, a young woman by the name of Bari Weiss, Bariwiss, who started her career at Columbia by attacking Columbia faculty for being anti-Semitic when she was a sophomore at Barnard at Columbia. And she has risen meteorically ever since that, because people want to hear what she says. She worked at the Wall Street Journal. She worked at the New York Times. She established her own website, some garbage called Free Press, and was bought by the Ellisons for $150 million. And she was installed as head of CBS News. So and they're trying to buy CNN. So they will perhaps, the Ellison family will perhaps they control CBS. They may come to control CNN. And they're trying to buy a share of TikTok. Now, I talk to people who are really deep in this world of social media, TikTok, and so on. And they say the people who are getting their news from TikTok, the young people who are getting certain parts of their information from TikTok, if they find that they're taken over in this way, they'll find something else. Let them take over TikTok. TikTok will disappear for young people the way that Facebook disappeared for young people. 15 years ago, people your age were on Facebook. Nobody your age is on. My wife is on Facebook. You guys are not on Facebook. And the ones who are on TikTok in 3 years will be on something else. So, I mean, it is something to worry about. But alternative and independent media are there. And you have brains to discern what's good and what's bad. And that's what you're going to have to do. So those are two questions. Rana's question. Palestinians failed to form a leadership. The British, created real religious institutions. You're absolutely. You must have read Palestinian Identity or The Iron Cage, because that's the thesis of two of my earlier books, that the British created religious institutions in order to undermine nationalist institutions, which is an old pattern of colonial powers. It's true that the Palestinians failed to form an effective leadership in the 20s and the 30s. They had a leadership, but it wasn't effective. And the revolt of 36-39 occurred because younger people rose up and started a revolutionary project, the revolt of 36-39, against the leadership, and without the leadership being involved, in fact. And the same thing happened again in the 1950s. The Shuqairis and the old leadership that tried to take over Palestinian politics were superseded by the generation of the PLO. They took over the PLO. And they provided a relatively effective leadership for the Palestinians for a couple of decades. But we're now in one of those very depressing downward periods where the Palestinian national movement is fragmented, where it's deeply divided, where there's no consensus on strategy, and there's no clear political line. And this is compounded by two things. The Israelis kill the good ones. There's a book by a man named Ronen Bergman, Bergman, called Rise and Kill First, which is essentially a history of Israeli assassinations of Palestinians and also others, Egyptian and other, in different phases of the 50s and 60s, Egyptian scientists and so on, but mainly Palestinians. And it shows how assassination has always been a tool of the Israelis in taking out the good ones in the leadership. And they know what they're doing. I mean, when they came to Beirut in April 1973, they picked 3 of the most effective PLO leaders to kill. When they went to Tunis to kill Abu Jihad, they rode right past the building where Abu Mazen lived. And they went to kill Abu Jihad. I'm not saying anything beyond the fact that he was right there. And they've killed several people at a time when they wanted to. And that's a problem. So the good ones are either dead or in jail, by and large. And you've seen the decapitation that they engaged in with the Hamas and Islamic Jihad and Hezbollah leadership over this war. Their intelligence is excellent. Their means of executing is top-notch. And they know who to kill. And that's one problem. The second problem is external intervention. It's one of the things that Abu Ammar, I'm a long-term critic of Abu Ammar, as some people here know. And I never was a great fan. I mean, I knew him. I was very close up to know what was up. But something that has to be recognized is that he managed to effectively insulate Palestinian politics from external intervention. Al-Qarar al-Falastini al-Mustaqil was his basic principle. We will not let the Syrians tell us what to do. We will not let the Saudis tell us what to do. He was influenced by these enormously powerful Arab countries. But to a very large extent, he preserved the independence of the Palestinian decision from these external. And it's one of the great virtues of that generation of leadership, headed by him, but including the Jabashaabiya leaders, Habash, and so on, including other leaders of Fatah. Today, there's an enormous hole where leadership is concerned. And it's partly because of assassinations. It's partly because of this fragmentation, but it's also because of external intervention. Everybody and his brother is trying to influence Palestinian politics, which is nothing new. You have the Iranians, you have the Turks, you have the Qataris, you have the Saudis, you have the Americans, you have the Europeans, you have the Israelis, each of them interfering in Palestinian politics. Now, so that's something that the Palestinians are going to have to rise above and overcome. And it's not going to be easy, but it's absolutely essential. There will be no progress towards liberation until that happens. It's absolutely essential. And that's a Palestinian problem. It's not anybody else's problem. I mean, other people can take their hands off, which would be great, but I'm not expecting that to happen anytime soon. Social media, I answered that. Deep Brazil support for Palestine. I'm glad you asked that question, because I think that there are some changes taking place in the global order. You're beginning to have middle-sized powers, Turkey, Brazil, Indonesia, which actually have Korea, which actually have Malaysia. I could go on and on and on. Literally on and on and on. These are countries with thriving economies. These are countries with large populations. These are countries which are fairly unified. These are countries which are beginning to have regional and, I would argue, soon global influence. So, we have the giant countries. We have the United States, Russia, China, India. But you have another tier of really big and important or prosperous and important countries. And I think that they will play a much bigger role as time goes on. And I think with a few of them, you're already seeing the beginning of that. When I say as time goes on, I don't mean in 2027. I mean in the decade to come or the decade. I'm a historian. And I'm not predicting the future. I'm just saying if present trends continue, I can see that happening. Now, I can see the United States and other hegemons resenting that and doing everything possible to prevent that. But that's what I see as a possibility. Last question about principles for approaching academics and dialogue. Once upon a time, when the political situation in the United States was different, I engaged in dialogues with all kinds of people, including Zionists. I appeared at the 92nd Street YMCA in the day that the first Intifada broke out, December 1987. I know that because of something that happened in that lecture. But I've stopped doing that, partly because the situation in the United States has changed. If you were not willing to engage in the 1980s, when I returned to the United States, you couldn't be heard. The only opportunity to get your voice out in the 1980s and early 1990s was if you were willing, against your will, to engage in these kinds of dialogue. That's no longer true. There's repression. They try and stop talks like this in American universities, but you can get your voice out now. The colloque that was supposed to be held at the Collège de France, and which this bigot of a minister prevented, together with the rector of Collège de France, is being held anyway. The academics who are going to do it are going to do it, and they're going to live stream it, and it's going to be seen by more people than it would have been seen by in the Collège de France. Yani, you cannot dam the sea. When my book was released in German, the same book, this 100 Years War, I had a talk scheduled in Vienna, and my German publisher said to me, "Don't go." I said, "Why?" He said, "They're going to ban it." I said, "But I want to talk." He said, "See what happens." So I said I would do it virtually. And the faculty who organized it set up everything. The police came and they closed the hall. So the students set up a screen outside so that I could be... The police shut down the screen. What did they do? They broadcast it anyway, and 300 students watched it on their phones. So it got through. And this colloque at the Collège de France is going to get through. So my point is, you can do these things today in a way that you couldn't do it 30, 40 years ago. So dialogue, no. I mean, I believe you have to influence the other side. I believe that. I talk to people like Peter Beinart, who's not a Zionist anymore. I talk to people who are, they're soft Zionists. I'll talk to them. But get on a podium with somebody, never. No.
Okay. Now,
let me say one more thing, which is that in politics, you have two choices. You can be pure or you can be effective. You can be pure and only speak to people who agree with you on everything and are willing to sign in blood on whatever the principles you agree. Or you can try and build a coalition, which sometimes involves working with people with whom you only agree on 75 to 80%. And if you do that, you are more likely to win than if you stay pur et dur and just only with the people, the tiny minority with whom you agree on everything. The one is politically ineffective. The other is more likely to be effective. You have to have some principles, obviously. But that's what politics is about. It's to build a winning coalition. You want to win. You don't want to be pure. You want to win. And to win, you have to reach out to people you don't always agree with. Sorry.
I think this is extremely important, especially in this context, where it's much easier to go with the no platforming and whatnot, as opposed to actually put forward a proactive argument about what we want and who we are. So at this point, we are going to we're going to open questions for the community at large. Okay. So you are from last time. So first person, second person, third person, fourth, and fifth. Oh, okay. The final round, Dr. Mustafa. Sorry.
Come on.
Hello, thank you so much, Professor Khalidi, for your talk. My name is Omar Zayat. Omar, yes. I work at Dawn, Democracy for the Arab World Now, based in Washington, D.C., founded by the late Jamal Khashoggi. And I wanted to speak about something. In your book, you discuss how the Palestinian national movement was repeatedly undermined, not only by Zionist and colonial powers, but also by the failure and division of Arab leadership. You've mentioned the Palestinian leadership not being invited to the first League of Arab States official meeting. Currently, we see countries like supposedly Muslim countries like Kazakhstan and Azerbaijan and the war with the Israeli military. We also see how this political change is shifting in the United States. Mamdani, Omar Fatah, Minneapolis. We see progressive candidates.
Go to the question, please.
My question is, the political change, the public opinion is changing in the United States. In Arab countries, it's not. There is public opinion, but there is no political change. Do you see this happening soon? Or will it be only happening within colonial states where there could be actual political change while we still stay stagnant? Thank you.
Hello. Thank you, Professor Rashid. This has been really an honor. My name is Reem Aliyan. I'm Palestinian. I'm doing international human rights law here. You've articulated in your book and in various things very beautifully and very academically the
through, of course, a historian colonial lens, everything. And being from Gaza and having witnessed wars there already, having my father there and my brother, my question is not really going to be specifically about Palestine and Gaza. Or in terms of concepts like genocide and ethnic cleansing. However, what we really see is that Palestine, and specifically Gaza, the past 2 years have exposed other things globally. It has exposed several things in different countries, which give us actually, if we take a wider look, it gives us a global system that is somehow established everywhere, that supports Zionism, that supports the genocide in Sudan, that supports segregation in Syria and overall. So what's your take as a historian, as a Palestinian historian, on this interconnectedness? I know that, of course, within our limitations as humans, we cannot predict the future. However, with everything, without going into details, how do you take this interconnectedness? Because I think this is a global consciousness right now, and this is not only something related to Gaza itself or Palestine, but it's really a global consciousness. So as a historian, how do you see that? I'm sorry.
No, it's fine. Can we go after her, Dr. Mustafa?
Hi. It's been a pleasure being here. I'm Kauthar Abdul Wahid. I'm a Yemeni student graduate student in Middle East Studies. My question, I'll try to be very brief, and it's kind of connected to the question which was before. As we all know that the Arab Spring has become a long, bitter winter, it seems. And considering your analysis before of the failure of post-colonial Arab states, how do you trace the connection between all this regional fragmentation, which is marked by civil wars in the region, as well as the silence and the bitter silence of Arab regimes on the current genocide? And I'm just thinking for individuals like us seeking to support the fundamental rights and the cause of Palestinian people, how can we critically navigate and maintain solidarity that is rooted in principles of justice, equality, without legitimizing political actors who exploit the cause for self-serving interests? Thank you.
Thank you. You have 3 so far.
I am Mustafa Kamil Said, political science professor at Cairo University. I think we have met before. My question, in fact, is very personal. I know that you have resigned from Columbia University, and as a university professor myself, I hate anyone interfering with my courses. But I would like you to reflect on your decision to quit Columbia University. And I would like you also to tell me about the attitude of your colleagues who share your views, and I know many of them. How can they cope with this situation where, you know, more or less they are told what to say and what not to say in the class? Thank you.
Good question.
Well, the flip stuff is that. Okay.
It's coming. Go ahead. Go ahead. I can hear you.
Great. My name is Rabab El Mahdi. I'm a researcher in China and Middle East relations. I'm currently doing an Arabic program at the AUC campus in Tahrir. Thank you very much for the talk. I wanted to ask you about your argument. Thank you very much.
So you argue very convincingly that this is not a local conflict, that Western support for the Zionist project has been fundamental to its success historically. But the question remains, what is the reason for this alignment?
Why?
Right? And so the conventional explanation, one that you find, I think, most often in the Arab world, and historically it seems to be true, that Israel's sort of a running dog for Western interests. It's the garrison of the West in the Middle East. But there's an alternative argument, very popular now, becoming more popular, getting more currency, that it's actually the influence of the Zionist lobby in countries like the United States, which is causing the U.S. to act against its own self-interest, which would be to make friends in the region, right? Especially with the Gulf states, for example. And this was argued by Walton and Mearsheimer in their their 2008 book, The Israel Lobby. So if you could comment on that, what is the reason for this alignment?
Yeah.
And love to hear your answer.
Gotcha. Good questions, all of them. let me answer the two hardest questions, which are actually related, by Kawthar and Reem. I mean, very simply, the precondition for the continued success of Israel and the Zionist project is a lack of Arab democracy and Arab division. This was a region that was in any way unified. And if this was a region which had democratic systems of government, you would not have the situation you have. Israel would have a much, much harder time operating. And going back to a time when, even though, in my view, the commitment of Arab governments to the Palestinian cause was often self-serving, there was a certain degree of unity. This was something that was perceived by Israel and the United States as very dangerous to Israel's interests. This is one reason that the United States supported the '67 war, and supported the royalists in the Yemen war, because the Arab nationalist tide, represented by Gamal Abdel Nasser, was something that American and Israeli interests saw as dangerous to their interests. Now, it's true. What has happened in the past 2 years has revealed a whole network of connections between genocide in the Sudan and intervention in the Sudan and support for Israel, globally and regionally. You have the same people normalizing as you have supporting the Janjaweed, or the so-called rapid support forces, and splitting Sudan yet again. And this is linked to a series of wars in this region. Some of us in this room, lived through Lebanese phase of that war, which have shattered societies and have led to civil wars, on top of which you had proxy wars, which were in many cases driven by external interests. And so you now have a multiplicity of Arab countries: Libya, Sudan, Lebanon, Yemen, Syria, Iraq, that have been shattered. And in some cases are failed states, or in some cases are recuperating states, in some cases have ongoing civil conflicts, which are also proxy conflicts. The conflict in Libya is not just East-West, it's Egypt, Turkey, Emirat, ila akhiri. The British on one side, the French, imagine, the British are supporting one government in Libya, the French are supporting another. So everybody's fingers are in this pie. And there's a conspiracy theory which says they wanted to destroy the independent Arab states. No, I don't think it was a conspiracy. But this is the result. In some cases, there was a clear intent. There was a fear of Iraq's power. Attack Iraq. Break up Iraq. It worked. And we now have that situation, as I've said, in a bunch of Arab states. This is a problem for the region and a problem for each people involved, for the Iraqi people, the Syrian people, the Yemeni people, the Sudanese people, the Lebanese people, the Libyan people. But it's also a regional problem. And it's not a problem easy of resolution, nor is the problem of democracy, because the kind of repressive apparatus, which in many cases is inherited from the colonial powers. The secret police in Egypt was set up by a guy called Russell Pasha, for your information. He was the chief of police of Cairo for like 30 years. And he's the one who created your mukhabarat. Same thing happened in Iraq. Same thing happened in France, in Lebanon and Syria. It was a French official who did it. Same thing happened in Palestine. The Israelis basically inherited the British intelligence system and the British prison system and the British emergency laws. I mean, essentially, the British handed them a state, or a proto-state, or an embryonic state on a silver platter. And overcoming those systems of repression, which are now much, much, much more developed, which are using databases that were unheard of in the time of Russell Pasha, which are using artificial intelligence, which are using all kinds of means. I mean, this is going to be the great problem of the 21st century for this region, overcoming this repression without destroying the stability and the prosperity of these countries, to the extent to which there is stability and prosperity. And it's not an easy task, because any autocrat can say, well, look at Syria, look at Yemen, into Aizinu? You really want to have that kind of catastrophe happen here? So give me absolute power. Otherwise, you're going to end up like these poor people in these destroyed countries. And I don't know the answer to that. I mean, these are good questions. It is clear, though, that the lineaments of some of the international networks of repression and external intervention have been revealed by this war. And something that has also been revealed is, something that is, somebody probably leaned against a light switch. And they can hear me, it's okay. Something else that's been revealed is something that you mentioned talking about Brazil, which is that against that, there is a global network of support for liberation. And I think we have to think about how to take advantage of that in Palestine and elsewhere. So that's my answer to those two questions. About Arab countries, about the international global regime. Two other questions. Yeah, I'll finish with that. Let me answer the question about Western support for the Zionist project, and then I'll answer the question about, I never resigned, I retired. But I'll talk about it. There are multiple explanations for this. I think John Mearsheimer was my colleague. Steve Walt was my colleague at the University of Chicago. They're both friends of mine. I think they overemphasize the role of the Zionist lobby. I think they miss the importance of the military-industrial complex and of multiple other powerful economic interests which are linked to the Zionist project. You now have biomedical, tech, security, a pile of interests whereby Western European and American conglomerates have partnerships and connections in Israel. But the most important is the military-industrial complex, obviously. So when you talk about interests, it's not just the strategic interest. It's not just Israel served as a proxy for the United States during the Cold War in the Middle East. Yes, that for a period was the basis of the alliance. It had nothing to do with Zionism or Christian Zionism or love of the Jewish people or anything else. It had to do with the strategic interest in Israel. In those days, in the 60s, Israel's armaments didn't even come from the United States. The biomedical industry didn't even exist. High tech didn't exist. You didn't even have computers in the 60s. So that was a strategic interest. And those strategic interests have changed over time. The United States has had an obsession with Iran and its regime since 1979. And Israel has peddled itself to the United States as a useful agent against Iran and its influence. And it sold that with its destruction of the Hezbollah leadership, with its attack on Gaza, with its interventions in Syria, and with its attack on Iran. And in an earlier period, they sold themselves as an agent of the United States in the global war on terror. Now, to some extent, this was a confection of Zionist propaganda. There never was a global war on terror because every instance of so-called terror was completely unique. Daesh was something, Hezbollah was something else, ila akhirihi. But they sold it to gullible, innocent, naive, stupid policymakers as one war. It worked. Today, this we are your agent against Iranian influence is a so that's one thing, interests. A second thing is Christian Zionism. Deeply underestimated in understanding the impact of Zionism in Western countries, in particular in Protestant countries. The most important leaders who talked about the return of the Jewish people to the Holy Land in England started in the 1820s, 30s, and 40s. The first writings of modern political Zionism do not come until the 1860s, 70s, and 80s. There was Christian Zionism before there was Jewish Zionism. Lord Shaftesbury, who was one of the most influential politicians in England, was an enormous supporter of the idea of Christian Zionism. And who was his son-in-law? Lord Palmerston, Foreign Secretary and Prime Minister for about 40 years. The man who opened the first British consulate in Palestine. The man who made war on you could go on and on. A lot of this was driven by this vision of the importance for Christians of returning the Jews to the... Before there was Jewish political Zionism, decades, generations before Herzl. If you look at Arthur Herzberg's book, very, very, very good book, entitled The Zionist Idea, he gives you the very first political Zionist writers, the 1860s and 70s, and there's just one or two of them. It wasn't even a majority movement in those years among Jews. It wasn't until the mid-20th century that it becomes a majority movement. Long before that, Christian Zionism is a very important, and that's why you have members of the British cabinet going along with this idea, including people like Balfour, who was probably an atheist, but was influenced by that's why you have people in the American cabinet of Woodrow Wilson going along with this idea. It's deeply embedded in evangelical Protestantism, in a specific reading of the Gospel of St. John the Divine, the Revelation of St. John the Divine, the last book of the New Testament. So that's a second element. And finally, you have the Zionist lobby, which has had enormous influence in Washington for about 4 decades, maybe 3.5, 4 decades. It barely existed in the 50s and 60s as a lobby. You had influential Zionists who were able to talk to presidents. So you had somebody who had influence on President Truman. You have various people, Brandeis and others, who talked to President Wilson. But as a lobby with an ability to affect legislation and to intimidate legislators, last 30, maybe 40 years. And I think its influence is waning. You see today politician after politician proudly proclaiming, I refuse to accept funding from AIPAC. Never happened before. Literally dozens of legislators in office today are saying, I will not accept money from AIPAC for my reelection, or I will not accept money from AIPAC for my campaign to win a seat. So, I mean, I think there are multiple sources of this. I would start with interests. The British start the thing not because of Christian Zionism, not because of love of Jews or hatred of Jews, though there's a little bit of both. A little philo-Semitism from the Christian Zionism and a lot of anti-Semitism. Do you know what one of Balfour's most important acts in government was? In 1905, a government of which he was the prime minister passed the Alien Exclusion Act, which prevented who from coming to Britain? Jewish refugees from Tsarist pogroms. The most anti-Semitic act in British history since King Edward kicked out all the Jews in the 14th century. That's Balfour. No philo-Semite. A Zionist, but no philo-Semite. But what takes the British to Palestine is none of that. Literally none of that. It's strategic interests. Egypt is vital because the Suez Canal is the path to India. Egypt is vital because it's important economically to Manchester. Cotton, production of cotton in this country, vital to British industry. The canal, vital to British strategy. There was a fear that the eastern frontiers of Egypt were vulnerable to the possibility of an Ottoman-German alliance. In 1905, 12 years before the Balfour Declaration, the British are thinking about how do we defend the eastern frontier of Egypt? We have to control Palestine. Weizmann didn't even know Lloyd George or Balfour or any of those people when the British General Staff decided they had to control Palestine. That's why they wanted Palestine. And Zionism was a means to an end, strategic. And I would argue the same thing. I mean, this is my bias as the kind of historian that I am, that it's interests that drive the politics of countries, great powers. It's not, sentiment. The last question is my resignation. Yeah. Okay. In 2020, long before the Gaza war, I decided that the course that Columbia University and most universities were on, the neoliberal course, a situation where academic leadership, in terms of deans, in terms of vice presidents, in terms of presidents, was increasingly in the hands of people for whom I have great respect in their own fields: accountants, lawyers, hedge fund owners, billionaires, big donors, wonderful people all. But their knowledge of education is as limited as my understanding of hedge funds and law and the things that they are expert at. But increasingly, it was the financialization of the university and the bean counting, miserly, stupid administrative decisions that were being made that made me decide I really didn't want to have anything to do with this institution anymore. I had taught by that time for 50 years. I started teaching in 1974. And I decided I would retire after a phased retirement, which began in 2021. In 2024, I didn't know there would be a war on Gaza. I didn't know what was going to happen. I did it for reasons that had nothing to do with politics per se, but with things like they would come down and they would tell us, cut the number of your PhD students. And we would say to them, okay. And so what are we going to do with lecture courses in which our PhD students are the TAs? Dabru halkum. Whoa. You guys get huge salaries and you're in power in the university. And this is an educational question. And you say, we're doing it for financial reasons. And you can't figure out how you're going to structure undergraduate education? You guys figure it out? Go to hell. I mean, half the teaching in my big lecture courses, I taught one big lecture course every year with about 300 students, about as many people as are in this room, sometimes more. And I had a half dozen or 8 or 9 of the most smartest PhD students who were my TAs. And we taught together. They ran the discussion sections. I wasn't there with the undergraduate students. I taught a graduate section. I only taught the graduate students. You pull the rug out from under that whole system, and you don't have the decency, you don't have the academic integrity to say, and we're going to replace the system, which is the basis of all lecture courses, with another system. You say, dabru halkum. They can take care of themselves, those people. And so I decided I was going to retire. And then part of my phased retirement agreement was the opportunity, if my department, the history department, and if the dean approved, I teach one course per year. And I wanted to teach that big lecture course on modern Middle East history, which all of my TAs taught in. And about 24 of them are now professors who are teaching similar courses. I mean, their own courses were based on that. So it was a feeder for PhD students who would become academics, and it was important for these undergraduates to be taught by really good TAs. And I said I would continue doing that as long as there were TAs, and I did that the semester after I retired in 2024, and I was planning to do it again this semester. And as soon as I said that I wasn't going to do it, literally the day that she read in The Guardian that I wasn't going to teach.
Know more about my Turkish attributes.
Literally the day after I announced I wasn't going to teach this course in September, which is the beginning of August, Katbatli, she wrote me an email and said, now you're not teaching, you can come to Cairo.
It's been, guys, in my defense, it's been 2 years. Every time I spoke to him, his wife, or his daughter, the whole family was on this. He's like, what can I do about my teaching? Again, a very good example of faculty, respecting their teaching schedule, but we also need a bit of that.
I'm very grateful that she did that because it gave me an opportunity to be with all of you. That's it. I mean, I could go on about.
I want to end with one question, because I want us to discuss resistance, and because this is something I know that you wanted to talk about yesterday. So Rashid and I had a long interview that's going to be available in a couple of weeks in Arabic with English translation. So when we hear a lot of voices, both within the Arab region and in the US, of course, not just being critical of Hamas because of its, being part of a political Islamist project, but actually taking such stance that's almost Zionist in terms of, we shouldn't be talking to them, they shouldn't have any presence. What do we make of this, and what's your position on that?
Yeah. I mean, I actually indirectly addressed this in a little bit of what I said about the book. The kind of oppression that you have in Palestine is inevitably going to produce resistance. Yani, there is no way that the kind of horrors that are inflicted on the Palestinian population is not going to lead people, in some cases, to nonviolent forms of resistance or political forms of, or other, and in some cases to armed resistance. And it's inevitable in this kind of colonial situation, whether we like it or not. Now, once upon a time, when the PLO leadership, in my view, was deluded into thinking that the Oslo process would produce a Palestinian state, there was an argument for halting armed struggle. Now, in fact, that process was designed not to lead to a Palestinian state. That process was designed to make the occupation permanent and designed to make the colonization process not just permanent, but even bigger than it was. But many people had that delusion. And one of the things that happened in the 1980s was, as Fatah and the PLO moved away from armed struggle and liberation to negotiation and a two-state solution, other people said, no, the situation hasn't changed. They were not all Islamists. There was not only Hamas. There were others who believed this. And they continued armed struggle. Now, you can criticize that. You can say, well, they're the ones who undermined the peace process. I don't believe that's true. I don't think there ever was a peace process. I do not believe that what was offered to the delegation I advised in Madrid and Washington, and the delegation, a different, much less competent delegation that Abu Ammar and the PLO sent to Oslo, I don't think what was offered to them could ever, under any circumstances, have led to self-determination, statehood, and so on. In Nema, there was an argument to be made. I don't think that argument can be made anymore. Now, I'm not saying that justifies armed struggle. There's intelligent, strategic armed struggle, and there's stupid, counterproductive armed struggle. There are things that you do that also can be considered war crimes. Attacks on civilians are war crimes, whether it's in a colonial situation or not. Now, some people say, well, they're all settlers. It doesn't matter. An old woman is an old woman. A child is a child. International law doesn't say because this child or this old woman is a settler that they don't fall under the rules of the laws of war. Nevertheless, liberation movements in the past have not made those distinctions. The Algerians won liberation by blowing up cafes. And you can say, well, that was a terrible thing. And it was a terrible thing. But it worked. The ANC blew up all kinds of stuff. The IRA blew up all kinds of stuff, including a lot of innocent people. And I think that can be condemned without saying, therefore, armed struggle is illegitimate, or saying Ireland would have been liberated without armed struggle. And there are now Irish revisionists, unfortunately, who argue Ireland did not need armed struggle. Well, my foot. Go back to the 1918, 1919, 1920, 1921 Irish War of Independence. They did 5 other things besides armed struggle. They created an Irish parliament. They took the Irish members of the British Parliament who'd been elected in 1918, and they left London and they went to Dublin and they formed the Dáil, the first Irish Parliament. So that was parliamentary resistance. And they did propaganda in the United States, in Britain, and they did diplomacy, and they did a million other things. Nonviolent boycott. Boycott's an Irish word. It comes from a boycott of British landlords by Irish peasants in the 1880s. They had a multiplicity of forms of resistance, but they also blew up British soldiers. And the same is true in the Troubles. You can critique the IRA until the cows come home, but you would not have had the peace process that you had. You would not have had a resolution, apparent resolution, of the Northern Ireland aspect of the Irish problem if it weren't for violence. I'm sorry. The people who were murdered by British paratroopers in Derry in 1971 were unarmed civilians marching for a change in the colonial situation in Northern Ireland, and British paratroopers shot them down. Now, anybody who doesn't expect the Irish to pick up guns when that happens is crazy. Not because it was a smart thing to do or the right thing to do or the strategic thing to do, but that's what happens in colonial situations. And so, I have my critiques of Hamas. Personally, I'm not a great fan. But that's not the point. The point is, in colonial situations, you're going to have resistance of various forms, and one of them is likely to be armed. Khalas. I don't think there's much more to say about it.
And you're going back. So, yeah. Omar and Marwan, can I ask you just to wait for 5 minutes? So we're going to end this. I'm going to thank Rashid. And once we're done with that, can I also ask you, because I know that this is very hard, but not to stop Rashid because he has another appointment and poor Layla here has to escort him out. So please don't calm. Yeah, don't make her life difficult, okay? So Marwan and Omar are from the SU and the Political Science
What's the SU?
Association.
Sorry.
The Students' Union.
Okay.
It's AUC Students' Union, and they will be presenting.
I think. There it is. Look on. Thank you.
What? Okay.
Please, first, I want to thank the students for attending in great numbers. You have proved that we are not privileged, airheaded students. We admire and we appreciate scholars and scholarship. So thank you so much. Thank you, Professor, for offering us this great opportunity to engage with Professor Khalidi. And thank you, Professor. This is a small, tiny, minor gesture for your long-standing to offer our narrative to the world in a very good English, eloquent language. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Saying
Adam.
The students.
What?
Did anything for
You want to take a picture
with the students? Standing.
all the students?
Like we're standing here. To like all the students.
Oh, Rashid stand here.
Yes, please.
Okay, so Rashid, can you stand here so that they take a student? No. All of you sit as you over here. They just want to take a picture. Just stand here, Rashid. Just
Okay.
stand here.
Okay.
I don't understand.
Who's going to take a picture?
Students. Like.
Okay, so take a picture, please.
Please.
Yeah.
Yeah. وقفوا جنبي.
Yeah, take a picture.
Yeah.
So sorry. Yeah. Oh yeah.
يلا.
عايزين البروفيسور دلالي بقى يفهم الكويشن شوية.
زقوا. ايه. تمام. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone,
I know.
for being here. Thank you, Rashid.